Intersections, conversations. Frustrated, angered, confused, or just plain tired of the polarizing conversations about race? Not sure what to say, what to think, or even what to do? Well, you've come to the right place. As we move beyond the rhetoric to look for solutions that reduce health disparities and create better working environments. As my grandmother would say, it has to come up to come out. Welcome to our Intersections Conversations, where diversity, equity, and inclusion meet.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into something really relevant?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Today we're tackling unconscious bias.
Which is more relevant now than ever.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And to help us unpack this, we're going deep with Andre Koen's guide, Overcoming Bias.
Great choice.
It's fascinating stuff, right?
Yeah.
And he doesn't just talk about the problem. He gives you actual tools to change things using cognitive behavioral therapy techniques.
It's really about taking that step from awareness to action.
Which is so key, because I feel like we hear a lot about unconscious bias these days, but then it's like, okay, what do we do about it?
Right, exactly.
But Koen really lays it out, starting with really understanding what unconscious bias is.
Yeah.
Because it's not always obvious, right?
It's not like we're consciously choosing to be biased.
Exactly.
Koen defines it as these ingrained attitudes or stereotypes that we may not even realize are affecting our perceptions and decisions.
They're kind of like under the surface.
Yeah, operating below the surface.
And we develop these biases over time, influenced by everything from societal norms to personal experiences.
All the things that shape us.
Right. They shape our interactions in often subtle but significant ways.
And those subtle ways are what he calls out with microaggressions.
Oh, yeah. The microaggression.
One example that really stuck with me from the guide was about a study where resumes with stereotypically black names were 50% less likely to receive callbacks compared to identical resumes with stereotypically white names.
Wow. 50%.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
That's huge.
Just for having a name that sounded, stereotypically one race or another.
It's crazy how these subtle things can have such a big impact.
It's not always about overt discrimination. It's often these seemingly small unconscious actions.
It's like these microaggressions are the smoke signals of a much deeper fire, right?
They're the outward signs of those internalized biases we've been talking about.
Exactly. And they can manifest in so many ways.
From tokenism and dismissive language to assuming someone's background based on their appearance.
And the impact on the receiving end, as you can imagine, is far from insignificant.
No, not at all.
Imagine constantly being underestimated or interrupted or spoken over because of someone else's bias.
It chips away at your confidence, creates a sense of not belonging.
Like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah, it's rough.
But here's where I love Koen's approach. He doesn't leave you feeling helpless. He introduces this concept of cognitive restructuring from CBT.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Which is basically a fancy way of saying we can retrain our brains to think differently.
And it's incredibly empowering.
Isn't it?
Because it's about learning to identify those automatic negative thoughts, the ones rooted in bias, and then challenging them with evidence.
So, for example, let's say you catch yourself thinking, oh, they wouldn't be comfortable in this role because... And then you fill in the blank with a stereotype.
We've all been there.
Oh, I've been there.
The key is to stop and ask yourself, what evidence do I have to support that thought? Is it based on fact or just my own ingrained bias?
Right, and more often than not, it's the bias talking.
Yeah, you're letting your assumptions cloud your judgment.
Totally.
Which is totally understandable, by the way, these things are ingrained. But we can work on it.
Exactly, and that's what's so great about Koen's approach. He gives us the tools to actually do something about it.
Instead of just feeling stuck.
Okay, should we dive into some of those tools?
Let's do it.
And that's where the real work begins, right? It's one thing to recognize those biased thoughts, but how do we actually change them?
That's where understanding common cognitive distortions comes in.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Koen dives into this in the guide, and it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
He talks about things like black and white thinking.
Where everything's either good or bad.
Yeah, we see everything in extremes.
Right.
Or overgeneralization.
Like if one person from a certain background does something, we assume everyone from that background is the same way.
Exactly.
Oh, we do that.
Or the opposite.
What do you mean?
Assuming everyone in a particular group is good at math, for example.
Or they all love to dance.
Right, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
These are all examples of how our brains try to simplify complex information.
It's like taking a shortcut.
Precisely.
But sometimes those shortcuts lead to the wrong place.
Exactly. They fall back on stereotypes and biases.
So how do we avoid those thought traps?
Well, the good news is that once we're aware of these cognitive distortions, we can start to challenge them.
Okay, I like that.
Koen provides a really helpful exercise in the guide.
What is it?
He encourages readers to identify their own personal top 10 list of cognitive distortions.
So it's like creating a personalized bias bingo card.
Exactly.
Love that.
And by becoming aware of the specific distortions we're prone to, we can start to catch ourselves in the act.
That's key.
And then reframe our thinking.
So we're becoming more mindful of those thought processes.
Exactly.
But Koen doesn't stop at just the individual level, does he? He also talks about the importance of systemic change.
Absolutely. He emphasizes that while individual work is crucial, it's not enough to create lasting change.
Right, because even if we're working on ourselves, if the systems around us are still biased,
it's going to be an uphill battle.
Yep.
We need to address the systems and structures that perpetuate bias in the first place.
So it's about changing the rules of the game, not just how individual players are playing it.
Exactly.
I like that.
He talks about the importance of diversity and inclusion training.
Which can be so hit or miss, you know?
Absolutely, and he agrees.
Does he talk about what makes it effective?
He advocates for training that really challenges people's assumptions and helps them develop empathy and understanding.
Okay, so it's got to be more than just checking a box.
Exactly.
He also talks about the importance of feedback, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And how creating a culture where people feel comfortable giving and receiving constructive feedback can help us identify our blind spots.
That's right.
Because sometimes we don't even know what we don't know.
Exactly.
Is that where Johari's window comes in?
Yes, that's a great model that Koen highlights for understanding this concept of blind spots.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
It's like a window into how we see ourselves and how others see us.
Right, I remember that.
Imagine a window with 4 panes.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
There's the open pane, which represents information about ourselves that we and others are aware of.
Got it.
Then there's the hidden pane, which represents aspects of ourselves that we know, but keep private from others.
Okay, so it's like our secret hopes and dreams.
Sure, or maybe that embarrassing habit we don't want anyone to know about.
Exactly.
Right now, the blind pane is where it gets really interesting.
Oh, I feel like this is where the good stuff is.
This pane represents aspects of ourselves that others can see, but that we're unaware of.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It could be something like interrupting people constantly or always wanting to be the center of attention.
Okay, ouch. But those blind spots can be tough to swallow.
But they're so important to uncover.
Absolutely, and that's where feedback comes in, right?
Yes. By seeking out feedback from others, we can start to shrink that blind pane and become more self-aware.
And finally, there's the unknown pain, right?
Right, the mysteries of the subconscious.
The stuff we don't even know we don't know. But focusing on that blind pain, that's where the real growth happens, right?
Absolutely.
Totally. It's like that saying, the unexamined life is not worth living. But in this case, it's the unexamined bias that can really trip us up.
And you know, a lot of that comes from the narratives we've internalized growing up. The societal stories we're told about different groups of people, they become so ingrained that we often mistake them for just objective truth.
It's like we're swimming in it and we don't even realize it.
Exactly.
So how do we even start to unpack that?
Well, I think it starts with bringing those narratives to the surface. Like, what were you told about, say, different genders growing up, or different races or religions or abilities? Were those stories complete and accurate, or were they filtered through maybe a lens of bias, even if it was unintentional?
That's such a good point, and it makes me realize how much of how we see the world is shaped by these things we don't even question.
And that's the thing about this work. It's not about being perfect. It's about that continuous journey of self-reflection and growth.
So it's progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
Which I like because it makes it feel less daunting.
And that first step on the journey, as Koen says, is awareness. The more we understand our own biases, where they come from, how they operate, the better equipped we'll be to challenge them and, create a more inclusive world for everyone.
Absolutely. And on that note of empowerment, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into unconscious bias. We've covered a lot of ground today, from understanding what it is to exploring techniques for actually changing our own biases.
And creating that more inclusive world we're talking about.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Well said. And like any good journey, it starts with that single step.
Keep questioning those assumptions, folks. And until next time, happy diving.
Intersections, conversations. Talk is cheap. We have explored key issues in developing better human relations, but it means nothing if you don't do something with our conversations. Race and differences are just obstacle illusions, so do something right where you are. Well, that's it for this intersection conversation, where diversity, equity, and inclusion meet.